Good morning. The stage is yours.
All right, thank you, Artis. Welcome, everyone. This is a topic that I write about quite frequently as a technology analyst on the Forbes.com platform. And what I'd like to do is break it down into four areas. First, talking about security, then interoperability and supply chain performance, because I think, early on, a lot of naysayers pointed to Open RAN as being more cost optimized versus performance optimized. And there have been some things that have been, addressing that particular issue. And then finally, sustainability, which obviously is a very important topic to the region and quite frankly to the world as well. But let's jump into security, gentlemen. And, from my perspective, when you disaggregate infrastructure, it tends to create an expansive threat surface. So the first question I'd like to pose to the panel, quite frankly, does more work need to be done here to ensure the security? Now, I will mention there is a security panel later in the day, but I think it's important to touch on the security aspect. So maybe, Timo, we can start with you.
Yes, so as you know, I represent Red Hat and indirectly open source communities as well. Millions and millions of developers out there on various open source projects and communities. And we do believe, first of all, that open source alone is a big influencer of insecurity, because there are so many eye pairs looking at the code, and the potential breaches are found very quickly because there are so many people, and they are fixed also very quickly because of this massive community. So that's the open source part of this whole thing. And within the Open RAN, we also think that, a few things, disaggregation of the functionalities into smaller pieces like radio unit, distributed unit, and centralized unit, and others, it helps in the security domain as well, because the entities are smaller. Mm-hmm. And if there is a breach, security breach, it typically will be in one of those smaller entities, and,
sure.
and maybe it's easier to fix. And of course, we have organizations like Oran Alliance and others who are working diligently on securing communication between these entities and the whole deployment.
Sure. And I think one of the benefits of, the open source community is having this whole upstream and downstream scenario where you have more eyes on potentially, issues, and security being one of those. I know, Alexander, you want to weigh in on this as well.
Yeah, as Timo already said, more doors mean more possibilities to get in. On the other hand, more doors also could mean more guards at the door and having smaller chunks that are more easy to manage and control. Certainly the Oran Alliance, as you already mentioned, has put strong focus on security.
Right.
We have now the zero trust principle, where every action basically needs to be authenticated. And by using tools for traffic monitoring and deep packet inspection, these are just tools to also operationally verify that this communication is not frauded.
Sure, yeah, and we're going to talk more about, ORAN Alliance, Open RAN Policy Coalition, and these entities that are trying to drive standardization and harmonization, because that's one of the challenges as well. But Slawomir, I know you want to comment on this topic as well.
Yeah, so I fully agree with the guys that having a disaggregated system means that we have more eyes and ears to identify the potential threat. But whether we can make use of it, that depends on how we build the actual Open RAN, the actual stack. Because in order to make use out of this information that we sense regarding the threats, we need to be very reactive if we sense the actual threat. So let's say move CU from instance from one endangered location to another one.
Yeah.
And that indicates that maybe, because we are talking about 6G as well,
sure.
In this transition between 5G and 6G, we will see that the stacks need to be disaggregated to the further extent, not just DU and CU, but they should be more liquid, kind of, so that the reactivity can be instant to the threat that is identified through those more ears and eyes.
Sure. And we're not talking about it, but vRAN is not the same as Open RAN.
It's-
But when you virtualize anything, right, and you bring cloud scale into it, that opens up a whole host of blind spots and gaps that need to be addressed with sort of cloud native application protection is an example. But
Absolutely.
David, anything final to add before we move on to the next topic?
I mean, I agree with all that was said, really, but just to zoom out a bit, the UK government has made the policy decision that having two major vendors in the market is in itself a massive security and resilience risk. So the idea of having Open RAN and more vendors is inherently more secure for critical national infrastructure. I agree with the points, more doors equals more guards at the doors. Also, there's a massive development community. Problems will get identified and solved more quickly. Having said that, we're not naive. We are aware there are security risks, but that's why we're investing so much money in testbeds and trials in Sonic Labs. When new vendors can come and prove that their kit is secure and reliable, at least as secure, before it goes to market. So yeah, agree, but just wanted to set the big picture as well.
No, that's great. And the reality is, beyond just disaggregated infrastructure in general, cybersecurity continues to be a huge challenge for organizations. Not only service providers, but enterprises as well. Bad actors continue to get sophisticated. Now we have AI and generative AI, and it's a double-edged sword. It's going to improve the capabilities of cybersecurity solutions, but at the same time, enable bad actors to be even more creative. So this issue isn't going to go away anytime soon.
Sorry, very quick, just on that.
Yeah.
Throughout history, new technology brings advantages and disadvantages. And,
Right.
the market is going towards Open RAN, and we're going to have to solve these issues, but they are absolutely not insurmountable.
Right. Good point.
So can
Yeah.
I add
Sure, Timo. Sure.
one more dimension? So yesterday we were running a supply chain security, co-creation event, and supply chain security is highly interesting now in Open RAN and also in disaggregated 5G core, because there are now tens and tens of vendors providing their components and technology.
Right.
So securing the supply chain, even before anything else has become more and more important.
Yeah, I mean, and when you think about supply chain and the ramifications and in the inflationary pressures that we're experiencing on a global basis, you can just look at SolarWinds and that famous breach. Supply chain is a vulnerability that needs to be definitely addressed. But let's move to interoperability, integration, and supply chain. That's a great segue, Timo, to the next topic. And from my perspective, we're well into 5G deployment, and many of the RAN plans were locked back in 2017 and 2018, before even there was a discussion around Open RAN. And so from my perspective, does that kind of make Open RAN relevant for 5G, or is it more of a 6G consideration, which is sort of the title of our session? So maybe Alexander, we can start with you.
Yeah, thank you. As you said, 5G was defined quite a while ago, and Open RAN came a bit late, and that's, from my understanding, one of the reasons why we currently see a delay. On the other hand, any RAN always needs a fallback RAN.
Right.
And this is maybe one of the technical reasons for the delay right now, because if we look at the RAN rollout, particularly in the Western world, it's primarily still non-standalone, so you have an LTE anchor.
Yeah.
And Open RAN was not designed for LTE. It works quite well with 5G, but for LTE you have to do some tricks, you have to do some adapters, you have to work with the legacy vendors, who obviously don't necessarily like to get new vendors in. So you're a little bit in a lock-in situation. We're now looking at 6G. 5G is designed for Open RAN, or Open RAN was designed for 5G, so then you would have 6G with fallback on 5G,
Right.
Which probably will mean that the mass rollout of Open RAN will happen in 6G, while now in 5G we will certainly see a couple of stages. First with still single vendor networks based on the Open RAN interfaces, then in the next stage and the next roll of a wave of tenders, also exchanging some of the components with other parties, and then finally in 6G it's going to be very flexible.
From my perspective, where I see it playing in a 5G world is obviously greenfield. So, you have operators like Dish Networks that's trying to launch, its first mobile network public network in the United States. You have Reliance in India. You have Rakuten. Boy, there's a lot of history with Rakuten. They're probably the poster child for disaggregated infrastructure and Open RAN and that sort of thing. But, and also, like in Europe, Vodafone has been very bullish on Open RAN as well. And, they boast having some of the, largest deployments. And I think, even for brownfield networks in rural areas where you have less subscriber density, Open RAN can be, a viable alternative to a traditional, RAN infrastructure just from a CapEx perspective. But that sort of leads into the next point that I want to discuss with the panel, and it's around integration. And so in the past, traditional RAN vendors and Ericsson and Nokia and Samsung Networks and Huawei, up until most recently, they did all the integration work, but it was quite costly to the public mobile network operators. I mean, I've spent time with T-Mobile in the U.S. and, Mr. Neville Ray, who's now retired, and John Saw, and they would always complain about, man, we have to pay, millions of euros and dollars, for this integration. But, that does become a challenge, and who's going to, kind of pick up the mantle there? And what's interesting, you've seen some mobile network operators step up. So I mentioned Rakuten with Symphony. Tarek was leading that charge. He's now moved on. But recently, Alexander, you and I were talking about this just this week. NTT Docomo with its Oryx platform, they're blueprinting. They're trying to close the gaps. And so, and I know that you've spent some time with NTT Docomo, Alexander. So, any thoughts here on the integration front?
Yeah, I mean, integration is obviously the biggest challenge in Open RAN, because if you chop it up and then you're trying to piece it back together, that's where the work comes. And as you correctly said, that's something that has been taken over by the major network vendors in the past. Now we are looking at a mix and match. What is very important for me in that context is to limit the effort, because if you just look at the number of components, and if you have 5 varieties on every of those network components, it obviously scales just multiplicatively the effort if you do complete end-to-end testing. Yeah. So what's important is that we need to have some baseline testing as a certification of the individual components that at least take you 80% of the way. And for that, it's obviously necessary to have independently developed test and measurement equipment to have a independent reference that you can test against, and not just one golden device, because you never know how golden the device really is.
Right, yeah. I mean, blueprints are great, but I know, Slawomir, you've got some perspective on this as well from an integration standpoint.
Well, actually, on the contrary, we don't see much of the issues on the integration. Of course, there is this interoperability testing where Sonic Labs, for example, they help a lot by providing the great environment for various vendors to...
An example of open source, right, with Sonic?
Yeah, and open source, exactly. But beyond that, the way Open RAN should be provided to the customers, I think, should not differ much from the basic IT, so that you reuse the same resources at the
I mean, it's common off-the-shelf servers, it's software,
That's the point. Plus, the hardware should be plug and play, or you should be able to reuse as much as possible the hardware that is already existing. I'm talking now about the computing hardware.
Right.
So that puts a bit of a different perspective, and I think that really this is the direction to make these rollouts and deployments as easy as possible, to look where we can save on resources rather than add new ones.
Sure.
Plus, this is also a widely known misconception that the integration is such an effort that who would be the party taking this on their shoulders.
Right.
While there are plenty of companies willing to enter this business because they are IT integrators, so they would love to integrate the new kind of IT stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear the other argument that, does the OpEx of that integration eat up the CapEx savings, right?
Yeah.
Because you see all these figures, Open RAN can deliver 40% improvement in CapEx and 60% improvement in OpEx, but often the math is funny when it comes to that, right? Timo, did you have something?
Yeah, so first of all, we as Red Hat, we are a big proponent of industry-neutral integration labs like Sonic Lab and I14Y Lab in Berlin. There's a Telecom Infra Project Community Labs. There are maybe too many of those right now, but they are a good thing because they are neutral labs. But I'd like to touch the point of the entity Docomo Orex just a little bit because it's a good example of close collaboration to make things happen. So as said, Docomo decided to have 4 different blueprints which have a set of vendors and components for this one and this one and this one and this one. So 4 different ones.
Right.
And it's been a very close collaboration and partnership between these vendors and companies and individuals, and it has turned out to work really well, and they will even deploy, not in large scale, but deploy on the field those blueprints with these vendors.
Sure.
And what I'm hoping Docomo would do, that's their call, of course, but I'm hoping that what they would do next is that they define next set of blueprints and a little bit shuffle these vendors and make another combination of interoperable components.
Right.
It's a good example how to make it happen. Okay, granted, it's operator-led, a big operator-led,
Right.
and
A little unusual.
unusual, and it's not a neutral lab, but it has worked.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's a good point. And, and we've touched on it a little bit. We've talked about the ORAN Alliance. There's the Open RAN Policy Coalition. There's been TIP that's tried to harmonize the efforts of both. The European Commission as well. And it's all about, codifying standards for the deployment of this stuff. But, often I look at all of that and I go, are there too many cooks in the kitchen? Maybe that's a U.S. expression. And maybe Alexander, you can weigh in on this. I mean, and obviously they all have the right intentions, but is it confusing things? Are there too many people involved? Or what's your perspective there?
I mean, they all have slightly different areas of expertise that they like to cover. Where the ORAN Alliance is very much focusing on the interoperability and ensuring that the interfaces work correctly between all those new network components. TIP is more looking also at kind of integrating the 3GPP tests and adapting them for the new ORAN world. So I think every one of those organizations is contributing very much to the progress of the standard. What's a bit missing, and this has been discussed over the last couple of months in various organizations, is really a kind of reliably working certification. I know that TIP and the OTIC labs, they are providing badges,
right.
But that's kind of a single snapshot in time. And talking to one of the operators, they said, yeah, if we certify let's say a radio unit based on software version 2.0.1 in March, and then we get it deployed in April, it may be on 2.0.5.
Right.
And
it's almost, like this kind of like staggered approach, right?
Yes. So we need a CI/CD also for the testing.
Right.
And these are processes that, for instance, are very well managed by on the device side by GCF and other organizations. They have the processes in place to also do these delta testing and then provide reliable test results to the industry. So this Test Ones works everywhere. That's promoted by GCF. Would be great to have also in the ORAN space.
Sure. I know, Timo, you've got some added perspective here as well.
Well, the ORAN spec, I mean, interface spec domain is kind of challenging from a few different perspectives. One is that when you look at the ORAN Alliance compliant diagram with RUDU, CU, RAN intelligent controllers and SMOs and all these things, there are many interfaces. And part of the interfaces are defined by 3GPP, and the other part are defined by ORAN Alliance. So only that creates a challenge for the industry because the specification work between these two organizations have to be aligned. Otherwise, nothing happens.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
and verifying that the interfaces are sufficient and effective and well-defined, it's one of the challenges.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fascinating topic. We could probably spend the balance of the panel, discussing it. And, from the U.S. perspective, a lot of ORAN was driven from a supply chain standpoint recognizing initially that in many rural parts of the United States, there's Chinese infrastructure there. I mean, obviously telecommunications is critical infrastructure. Concerns that, cannot publicly, be shared, and there's a lot of rip and replace that's going on there as well as in other parts of Europe. But it's also, it's allowing the U.S. to lean into software, which has typically been one of our strengths in technology, and as well as leveraging companies like Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and Dell Technologies that deliver world-class server technology. And so that gets to the third topic of the panel, and it's around performance. And so I alluded to this earlier, but initially, the early naysayers around Open RAN were stating that it was basically cost optimized versus performance optimized. However, as we flash forward from that point in time a few years later, we have solutions from a silicon perspective from Marvell and Qualcomm and other ecosystem partners that are addressing the performance concerns with Open RAN accelerator cards and that sort of thing. So, I mean, Slawomir, I know that you wanted to weigh in on this, but do more things need to be done here? I mean, we've talked about blueprints, but what else can be done to make Open RAN viable in a 5G world, and then even more, proven and tested in a 6G world?
So I'll start with a bold claim that you can have better performance at a lower cost, but something needs to be done, something different.
Faster, cheaper, better. I like that.
Something different that we are doing so far. Now, when we look at the Open RAN solutions of the pioneers that are right now on the market, they all grew from upgrading the 4G stacks.
Sure.
And, there were various acquisitions of the companies. So the origins are 4G. And 4G was not a disaggregated system per se. Yeah. So you have a solution which is like an upgrade of 4G basically. And in general, the 5G by many, and I also belong to this group, is perceived right now as just a better 4G.
Okay.
For the only reason.
I mean, that's a reasonable assumption.
Yeah,
right?
but for the only reason of having just the throughput improved by the sole fact that we have larger bandwidth available.
Right.
But that's providing more for more resources.
Right.
And that's not a smart way to do. So what I think should be done, and that is possibly on the transition between 5G and 6G, is to focus on extremely efficient use of resources, the existing resources.
Yeah.
So getting most out of the computing that we have,
right,
and the bandwidth, the spectrum, which currently, most of the time, is unused. Right. Either spoiled by the interference because we have a very competitive algorithms in the radio interface that are competing for spectrum, or the capacity is wasted at the computers because we dimension servers for the busy hour for the worst case.
Right.
So something needs to be done with this. And
better provisioning.
Exactly. When we address this issue, then I'm sure we can have cheaper solutions with better performance.
Well, and I think this whole notion of standalone and non-standalone that was introduced within the 5G new radio deployment has also affected the performance, because when you sort of look at where we're at, I mean, most regions around the world are still non-standalone. That's we're beginning to see some acceleration in the U.S. I mean, T-Mobile was first to standalone, and just for the audience, that's matching 5G core infrastructure with 5G RAN, and in a non-standalone scenario, kind of I call it the tweener. It allowed mobile network operators to focus on the radio access network first and then go back and upgrade the core infrastructure. And honestly, you can't get to things like network slicing and the full potential of ultra-low latency and fast throughput and massive device support until you get to standalone. So, but also what's really important in all of this is network design, right? And test and measurement. And Alexander, I mean, you're representing one of the biggest test and measurement companies in the world. And so how important is test and measurement in making ultimately Open RAN successful?
Yeah, I mean, as I already brought the example of mobile phones, and looking back now at, I think yesterday there was an article in one of the newspapers that we have now 50 years of digital mobile telephony, starting with GSM, and one of the reasons was that that was the first time where we had really interoperability worldwide, where we had roaming and really standardization. And this standardization made this technology successful worldwide. Standardization and also then possibilities to test this according to the agreed specifications. If we look at the performance that you just mentioned, that's obviously also something that you can test in the lab. There are various approaches to do that. What we have to, and you also need to verify it in the field. What we need to be a bit careful of right now is that we also define those lab test setups in a way that they are cost efficient, because everybody's looking for the money right now, right?
Sure.
So, and yes, you can test a lot of things in the lab. We can be very inventive. It's fun to design really hugely complex test systems. But we also need to consider what we test in which way, like looking at receiver algorithms and throughput. This is pretty much software, it's baseband.
Right.
And this baseband stuff we should actually test on baseband and not build maybe complete end-to-end, including later on the over-the-air interface setups to test such functionality.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it's important to test the RF performance of the radio units with test equipment, because this is where we have excellent test equipment for. We can benchmark the performance, the signal quality, the receiver sensitivity, which are the basic measurements that you do on RF. And then we need to complement that with field testing, because some things are just too complex to be simulated in a lab. Like, and we saw that very much with the rollout of FR2, which kind of got stuck along the way, because we found that real life can be much more complex than a simulation, and leaves and stuff certainly impact very much millimeter wave. So at some point of time, you need to go on the field and really verify.
Sure.
And it's important that all these things tie together and that they're consistent.
Well, I mean, that's why we're seeing so many proof of concepts right in the field. But I know, Timo, like before, we started planning for this panel, we were talking about some of the concerns with front haul, right? So, I mean, that's potentially a bottleneck here, right?
It could be, but, it's clear that we as Red Hat, we have pretty much nothing to do with open front haul. We provide the cloud platforms and automation tools and all that stuff. But on the other hand, from the overall performance point of view, we care on open front haul a lot, because we are providing the timing and synchronization chain with precision time protocols, which go through the open front hauls. So we just have to assume that open front haul works.
Right.
But other than that, we don't have much to do that. But I'd like to touch one point on this. It's both integration topic, but performance topic as well, which is integrating the hardware accelerators into the system, DU specifically, of course. And it's kind of interesting that we as a cloud platform vendor, we have to do all the hardware acceleration integration to allow access to the workload, for the workload to the accelerators. Yeah. And it's an integration issue, but it's also a performance issue. And it introduces a lot of work for us, which is okay. Yeah. We like work. Yeah. But there are so many of those. Some people prefer, look-aside accelerator. The other people prefer inline. Then there are accelerator vendors, and they are all different. And we do need to integrate all of those, which kind of introduces a somewhat problem for certain operator customers for us who want to have an environment that they have a RAN workload from this vendor, they have a RAN workload on this vendor, and then they just change it between the platforms. And as long as the RAN workloads need different accelerators, that's not possible. Right. Because they need this one, and this guy need this one. But it's a performance issue, and it's an integration issue as well.
David, I promise I haven't forgotten about it. Seems like it's been forever since we've gotten you to weigh in, but I know you have a lot to speak to on this topic, so would love to get your perspective.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I can't compete with fellow panelists on technical knowledge, but from a government point of view, just as a bit of background for people if they don't know, the UK government had its telecom supply chain strategy published, a diversification strategy published about 3 years ago now, and that was supported by 250 million of funding. And two major goals are getting more vendors in the market, but also supporting the development and deployment of Open RAN. Now, when we designed that fund, we absolutely knew that testing was going to be key to prove the capabilities. So, you know, at the start, some of the money went to the Sonic Lab, which I've mentioned already, but I agree with Alexander, there's only so many things you can do in a lab, and you need to test it in the field. Right. So that's why 80 million of that funding went to the Open Networks ecosystem competition, and basically consortia could bid in to win money to go improve their systems, their solutions out in the field at scale. And we stipulated that those bids had to focus on key challenges like high density demand in urban areas, the RIC, automated software. So I guess my point is, you know, it needs funding, but the fact that people are bidding into this competition, they want to go and prove that it does work. Right. That's evidence in itself for me. Yeah. And these aren't niche players. These are big major UK MNOs that are supporting these bids. Right. So for me, the evidence is there that it can be done, and these test beds are going to be very important to demonstrate that to industry.
Yeah, you know, and I love the putting the gamification into the scenario, the contest to drive interest and esprit de corps. So I think there needs to be more sort of innovative approaches like that to get more people involved in the ecosystem. But let's shift, just for the sake of time, to our final topic, and it's around sustainability. And I'm just gonna, it's just a very, very general question. And Alexander, I'll start with you, but I mean, can Open RAN play a really tangible role in driving greener public and private cellular networks? Not only for 5G, but for 6G. And like, again, we're speculating about 6G, 3GPP hasn't published, a standard yet. So we don't know, will it be terahertz spectrum? Who knows? But can Open RAN drive a more greener, sustainable cellular network?
Definitely yes. I think actually with Open RAN we now have tools to tweak certain components, and we can, for the first time, look under the hood of the engine and see what's going on there. Like, I mean, Röhrenschwarz is very much on the RF side, so the radio unit is very important for us. Looking at the RAN, and depending on it, which analysts you believe in, between 50 or 80% of the energy consumption is actually happening in the RAN. So, and now with this open frontal interface, we have the possibility to test the radio unit in isolation. So use a DU emulator to run certain traffic profiles to see does more or less traffic automatically mean more or less energy consumption, or is there maybe a processor running all the time at full speed and doesn't really throttle down? This is the first time that we can really test this, make it visible, and also then benchmark certain vendors and certain product lines against each other. So yes, I think Open RAN really has a huge lever to reduce the energy consumption and carbon footprint.
Yeah, what's exciting, I mean, 5G is inherently, more virtualized, more software defined, to your point. Not that, that can't be accomplished with traditional RAN deployments, but Slawomir, what do you think about that? Yeah, is the answer yes as well?
Yes, the answer is yes, but let me refer to Alexander's point on measurements, because of course this is very important to measure the single units and elements, but the network itself is not just a summation of those elements, because they influence each other, radio units, through the use of the same channel, the same frequency. They have a very significant influence on the performance on the neighbors. So, and same wise, the loads on the computing can be shared among the number of computing units that are in the neighborhood. So we need to find ways to measure the network as it is. But of course, the performance and the sustainability are very well connected. We have an element in Open RAN that is called RAN Intelligent Controller,
Yeah.
which clearly,
The RIC, yeah.
exactly, that's the tool to influence how we can get the performance and energy savings out of the system. And I would just add to this that we have non-real-time rig, near real-time rig, but what we should have, I think, is a real-time rig.
Right.
Because certain things can only be done in a real-time regime.
Sure, sure. And David, I know the UK has some very, very aggressive goals for net zero and carbon emissions. Would love to get your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Really bold ambitions on net zero, and just an insight into being a policymaker in Whitehall. It's drilled into you. Everything has to have a focus on net zero, quite rightly. But even in our telecoms policy work, it does. And we've identified that Open RAN definitely can provide a greener solution. I particularly agree with Alex's points there, which I won't go over again. I'm going to talk about funding again as well, and we were very pleased last year to announce our first joint international R&D competition with the Republic of Korea, and that has a specific focus on energy efficiency and being greener, as you say. So like the security questions, there are problems and some concerns around Open RAN efficiency, but they are absolutely possible to tackle. And again, government funding is going to be crucial to do that. And then just a final point, again, the bigger picture, if we're creating more innovative, more secure and resilient telecoms networks that make more efficient road and rail and shipping, like
Right.
the big picture.
It has a ripple effect.
Yeah, absolutely.
So much else.
Absolutely.
And that's just a fantastic segue to kind of the last thing that I wanted to discuss on this topic, because sustainability is more than just power conservation. There are applications, for example, in agriculture, ag tech, to improve crop yield, using low power sensors and 5G's capability to support a massive number of more devices than LTE for IoT and water conservation and that sort of thing. So where do you see that impact happening? Timo, from your perspective, I mean, it could really make a difference in the world, right?
It can and it should. Now, of course, coming back to the Open RAN and what we can do, not being a radio vendor, nothing to do with the radios, but as Alexander mentioned, we have now opportunities to manipulate the low-level hardware features related to power management, like x86C states, B states, and really optimizing the usage of power on DU and CU and any other application where the cloud platform is present. Now, and there are quite a few open source projects out there, not really productized yet, which are related to sustainability and power management and energy efficiency and all these things, which is fantastic. Now, we have to be very cautious on manipulating these CPU states, because when you do that, you also lower the performance characteristics of the server, and
Sure.
And that has to happen. The manipulation of these states has to happen in close coordination of the application running. So application, whether it's DU, whether it's CU, whether it's anything else, the application needs to give guidance to the platform that now seems to be quite easy days, so you can now do this and this and this. And now I'm so busy, don't do anything.
Right.
So it has to be, and it's happening right now. We're working with, of course, Intel a lot and NEC and other people to do that. So that's the part we can do in Open RAN context directly.
Yeah.
What we can do indirectly is to host near real-time rig, which will have and already has a category of X apps for radio unit power management. So indirectly, we also contribute to power management in that way.
Sure. I know, Slawomir, you've got some thoughts here, and kind of where this could go as far as 6G, because let's not ignore the fact that was part of description of this panel.
So when I see the networks of 2030, because that's roughly the timing where we should expect the 6G to be.
Each of these Gs has lasted about a decade,
Yeah,
right? So that sounds about right.
More or less. Then I see the networks that are much more densified for the reason of providing capacity, because densification is the largest component of providing capacity, and many are indicating that this capacity is rising exponentially. So we really need to be prepared for a huge avalanche of data. And right now, the trend is rather to maximize the configurations of the base stations that are there already, and hence the tendency to use massive MIMO beamforming that can improve the performance, but it's costly at the same time.
Sure.
And for the sole reason that the acquisition of the site itself is very difficult and it takes a long of time. But when we take into account the fact that all around us there are players of infrastructure, not necessarily telco infrastructure, that already possess localizations, and that we possibly could use them in rolling out the radio units, or even pre-installing radio units, as LAN cabling is right now pre-installed in the buildings themselves, then we can find ourselves in a situation where the hardware is already there, the radio units are already there, and computing is already there for the reason of edge computing that is driven by the applications. So that would be ultra dense, extremely dense network for which you need a new class of RAN, radio access functionality, to be deployed there. So that's the vision we have.
Okay, awesome. Before we close, Alexander, David, any final thoughts? Maybe Alexander?
Yeah, as Slawomir already said, the site acquisition is one of the most expensive parts of the network rollout.
Sure.
So, and we saw also yesterday there a nice...
It shouldn't be.
Right.
It is.
It is today.
It is,
Yeah,
yes.
you're right.
It is, yes.
Well, that's what Open RAN hopes to solve, right?
Yeah, that's what we're trying to solve. We're currently seeing stacked antennas with... antennas are getting larger, just to save the effort of going for another site.
Right.
And that's maybe something that really needs to change.
Yeah.
Also with lower power networks and...
Sure, yeah. David, any final thoughts before we go to Q&A?
Just to say quickly, having openness and interoperability in the telecom supply chain, that is the key point for the UK government. Now, we have focused on 5G for a long time. We are looking towards 6G. We want industry to do that. You guys are the experts. But that principle of openness and interoperability has to maintain through. That's what we really care about. So we don't particularly see a difference, whatever number is before the G.
Great. Well, it's been a great discussion, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your time. I've learned a lot on this panel. We do have about a minute and a half for questions. We can also be available after the panel if you want to approach any of us. But Artis, do you want to field any questions?
Yeah, sure. There are quite a few questions, actually, a live debate going on in the comment section. But Ian is chiming in with his question. What incentive would a new entrant vendor have to invest in Open RAN, given you need scale and guaranteed market, whereby disaggregation aim is to reduce scale and provide more options with the ability to swap out vendors? Furthermore, the large two vendors now have Open RAN solutions.
I mean, it is becoming a pretty crowded market, right? When you look at Open RAN and like all the, and then, the traditional infrastructure providers like Samsung Networks are getting into small cells. So I'll just toss it openly to the panel. Don't be bashful. Anyone?
So maybe I start. So, the whole Open RAN and already network function virtualization earlier, like 10 years ago, which is all about the disaggregation, that just opened a door for many software companies like ourselves.
Sure.
We had nothing to do with the telco networks before. Now we do.
Yeah.
So we don't need to do much business case calculation.
Red Hat's a great example.
There is a opportunity.
Yeah, with OpenShift. And Awesome.
Quickly, funding in the UK, we have, not inconsiderable amounts of cash to give support to new companies who want to come into the market.
Mm-hmm.
So go to the UK.
So I'm representing a new vendor, rising vendor. So what helps is to get the attention of early majority market early, not late. So somehow to have assistance in crossing so-called chasm. And this is what Sonic Labs are doing.
Sure.
They are providing incentives for larger players, typically, I would say, risk-averse, very much. Operators are risk-averse,
Right.
to try out the new solutions. And that's a great example.
Yeah, awesome. Another
Excellent.
question? Are we done?
We're done. We're done. We're out of time. But I want to remind you the gentlemen are here, so please do take your time. They have came here from all around the world, so take your time and meet them and ask them questions in person afterwards as well. But right now, a very loud round of applause to our dear speakers, Slawomir, Timo, Alexander, David, and of course, Will, for setting the bar so high for this stage here today. Excellent, deep.